Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of the Here We Are podcast. It's the 7-year anniversary. We're going into the 8th year of the podcast, and I thought I'd record a solo episode. So this is much different. Just in case you happen to be tuning into this one, and this is the first ever Here We Are podcast that you've listened to. This is not a good I don't know what's all going to come out of my mouth. I can tell you that it's not a good representation of what the show normally is. So if your first time hearing this is listening to some guy blab about himself for an hour and a half, or let's try to keep it to an hour, and then you're like, well, that was kind of boring. Reasonable. That would be a reasonable assessment of what I believe is probably going to happen. And that's not representative of the show. I just wanted to share some thoughts about some of my background. I've done this a couple times in the past. I hate talking to myself. While being recorded, rather. I talk to myself all the time in regular life. Very healthy thing to do, by the way. If you don't talk to yourself, get into it. But don't like recording, talking to a microphone, or looking in a camera by myself. Not terribly comfortable with it. And something that I should probably get better at. Sometimes if you ever hear the intros or outros that I do, part of the reason why I don't do them very often is simply because I just don't like talking solo into a camera and microphone. I've literally released episodes late or not plugged shows or done like important announcements and things just because I get anxious doing this. So I'm getting out of my comfort zone. I'm confronting a source of insecurity and anxiety by doing this show. And hopefully it gives you just a little bit of an idea of what this show's about and some reflections on the past year. So I don't really have a plan. Just in my head, I thought, well, I'll give a little bit of a background. I'll talk about some of the things, a little bit of background of how I got interested in science in the first place, how I started doing a science podcast, the topics that we like talking about the most on this show, and why, and maybe some reflections on the last year or so. I think it's been about a year since I did one of these, and perhaps some thoughts about the future, or share a few of the ideas I have in other projects that I'm working on. So we'll see if I stick to any of that. Who knows? So if you happen to be, maybe I sent this to you because you're a potential guest or something like that, or just someone that I wanted to give the kind of basics of what the show is about overall. The main topics that we talk about on the Here We Are podcast are lots of how the mind works. So in doing that, it's quite a bit of, I particularly like thinking about the evolutionary underpinnings that gave rise to our many preferences, the way that we think, our conscious experience. So one of the things that I'm going to make this a very, very 101 simplified basics type stuff. But one of the things that I'm very interested in is so when we think about evolution, it's easy to think about it as, hey, okay, cool. We were these apes, and then we started standing upright, and isn't that neat? We have evolution like made our thumbs the way they are, or something like that. And what a lot of people aren't privy to, and the topic that I just find endlessly fascinating, is what were the pressures through time? What were the pressures through our ancestors, not just human ancestors, before humans, our ancestors that gave rise to early humanity, and what pressures were faced after that? What pressures were faced by all of life on Earth that created various predictable kind of behaviors and biases and things like, for example, negativity bias is a very simple one. And with any of these things, it's often way too simplified and can't be applied to every situation, and context is important. But just the idea that, if a good thing happens to you, that's great and everything. But if a bad thing happens to you, that could mean the end of your life, and that cost is much higher. That cost that might make it so that you never spread your genes on. And because of that, some of our ancestors that were a bit more cautious intended to weight negative experiences greater than positive experiences, survived and reproduced more because of that, in spite of the unnecessary anxiety that has caused modern humans and so many of our ancestors. And it's not a perfectly calibrated thing. The smoke alarm goes off at burnt toast sometimes, because that it's better to have that safer than sorry calibration than to not go off when you actually need it. So there's a lot of biases like that, and a lot of them have evolved over time. There's environmental influence as well, which we're also very interested in on this show. But why are you attracted to the people that you're attracted to? How have how have you as an individual changed over the course of your life, and what influenced that development across the lifespan? Was it just linear learning things, or are there different strategies at different stages of life? Stuff like that, endlessly fascinating to me. And it helps me understand myself. It helps me understand others. And it sometimes makes me more compassionate for myself and the human condition. And it sometimes makes me more frustrated, or makes life feel futile. And it's a whole range of emotions. I'm not a life coach. I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm not interested in kind of building up you just got to believe in yourself and everything's magic. That just doesn't resonate with me. And it's wonderful if on this show that you learn things that help probably maybe understand yourself a bit more. And if that has utility for you, and you are able to make better decisions in your life because of something that you hear on this show, that's awesome. But if something is a bummer, I also want to learn about that as well, because I think there's just a lot of wish thinking out there, and reality is so fascinating to me. Reality and learning about all of the topics on this show is so much more fascinating than the pleasant little stories that we tell ourselves. Doesn't always feel as good, but the little inspirational quotes and stuff, people love these things. They're sharing them on social media all the time, and plastering their home with them and putting them on greeting cards and stuff. And we like feeling good. It's a natural thing to do, but that stuff, it just doesn't do that much for me. And so my bias is I sometimes overindulge in some of the dark aspects of life. So we talk a lot about mental health on this show. We talk about depression and anxiety, and I think one of the things that makes me a good host, because I don't necessarily bring a lot to the table in terms of I don't have a background in science. I don't I'm not formally educated. I'm not the most disciplined student in terms of educating myself. My natural curiosity gets me a long ways, because I just gravitate toward learning about this stuff without having to force myself to. Sometimes I have to force myself to. But I think that my background as a stand-up comedian, and even before that, has helped me just being very comfortable with talking about feelings or my background or vulnerabilities or things that I'm cynical in life, a little more than the average person that is in a different social environment than I'm in, that might have a bit more of kind of constraints and social pressure to, be the cheerleader around the office and that sort of thing. And that's what's necessary to get ahead. And boy, if I had that skill, maybe I would be flourishing in that environment instead of trying to figure out a way to get people to listen to a science podcast that, very few people like hearing, like really hardcore academic science like we talk about on this show. And I think that's a shame, because I find this stuff endlessly fascinating. But here's how I got into it. So you'll obviously be able to play this podcast at like 2 times the speed, because I talk slow, and I didn't think about this ahead of time. But so I had a wholesome Midwestern background. I blab about this to many guests on the show, and I just never really quite fit into it. And I forgot to talk about the many other topics. Okay, we'll get to the many other topics that we talk about on the show. But that was just one example of how passionate and interested I am in just the one subject of how evolution has shaped our mind and preferences. But so I grew up, speaking evolution, I grew up in a pretty strict religious upbringing. I mean, it was an upbringing, or it was, I had a religious upbringing, and my upbringing was also strict. I'm not sure that it was necessarily strict because of religion, but there was an influence there. It didn't ever resonate with me. From a very early age, I questioned things. I would get in trouble for questioning things. And I, just in being a kid and trying to explore boundaries and different social norms and stuff, I used to push a lot of buttons. I used to root against the Packers, for example. I'm from Wisconsin, and that would, if I did that, I was 5, 6 years old and doing that, and it would drive my relatives, like actual adults, insane. And I just thought that was hilarious to me. And I just kind of any sort of groupthink thing. And yes, science can be labeled as groupthink as well, but I think that there's very different things going on with science than general, just kind of in group, the sort of in group communal experience that people have going to church or going to the sports games or a concert or whatever else. Nothing wrong with doing these things and enjoying your social life, but that's a very different kind of inclusive social experience than the kind of academic working away in the cubicle. And I also don't find it to be, although we're all in our echo chambers and everything, I've found scientists to be fairly independent. None of us are perfectly independent thinkers, but as part of the nature of the job, it's kind of about questioning, about thinking critically, about trying to falsify things. You don't go into church or a sports game trying to falsify a belief. You go there rooting for that belief to be true, even if it isn't. And that's that's one of the things that science is pretty unique in, I would say. But anyhow, my religious upbringing messed with my early life. I didn't like it. Maybe if I was brought up by a bunch of scientists, I would have rebelled against science as well. But I didn't like it. And I was kind of a closet atheist since about the age of 10. I didn't even know that there was such a thing as being an atheist. I thought I was the only one in the world, which meant either I was crazy or the world was. Turns out a little of both. But at the time, and everything's really big when you're a kid, and we all have these we're all heroes in our own minds and build up our obstacles more than is probably appropriate sometimes. But it messed with me. It was impactful. And when I was a teenager, so early on, I decided I wanted to be a stand-up comedian. And once I decided on that, then that was truly like, yep, I don't care about the school stuff. What does it have to offer me? And that's a regret that I have and might have been influential in getting me so into educating myself and reaching out to academics. And as someone who never had an interest in college, it's a bit ironic that now I find myself talking with so many college professors. But what happened was once I was like, I'm going to be a stand-up comedian. I don't need anything from school. I'll do the things that are easy or enjoyable to me. Like math was pretty much the only thing that I enjoyed in school. And sometimes there'd be like some English assignments that I'd have fun with and use as an opportunity to, write a funny story and get some laughs or whatever. But outside of that, I was really just rebellious, and it was a handful for my parents, and teachers and things like that. So I did not like my childhood at all. Didn't like it. Couldn't wait to get out. Couldn't wait to become an adult and move out and become a big time stand-up comedian. That was where my head was at. And so as I became a teenager and weed started becoming a thing that people were smoking, there's finally this opportunity for me to have philosophical conversations about, I'm talking, feeling this out for years ahead of time. Best friends of mine that I couldn't even be like, hey, do you think that God is a thing though? And once I was a teenager and I was able to start having some of these conversations and meeting so much resistance from so many good friends of mine, but I loved having the conversations and I loved the opportunity to finally have them. And because of that, there would be lots of questions of, well, if this and that isn't true, where did the universe come from? Where did all of this come from? And this was around the time that the internet first became pretty widely available, and I had the first personal computer and stuff, and so started looking into it, mostly just so I would have arguments to debate my religious friends. And I would say that I was a pretty angsty atheist. I was a pretty cynical person, and I always just kind of thought everyone was just kidding themselves all of the time, and including myself, but it's easier to see in others. So I get out of high school and I had like a kind of a, I don't know, small-ish town, small, like a suburban upbringing, very Pleasantville-ish upbringing, and blue-collar family and extended family. And I don't think college was a big thing. My parents didn't go to college. I didn't have many aunts or uncles that went to college. And so I got various jobs. I took factory work. I worked with my dad making countertops and stuff for a long time. Didn't get along with my parents. Didn't like working for my dad. Got some jobs at like a grocery store early on, and then factory work as an adult. And I got into drinking pretty heavily, like right outside of high school, as I was trying to save up money to move to, like, I'm going to move to New York City and become a stand-up comedian. It was also the time that I started having fun. I started enjoying myself. I started, like, I would go to, various college parties and stuff like that, even though I wasn't going to college, and actually had fun and got to feel cool and got to have friends. And that delayed me for way too long. 'Cause I ended up working in factories and stuff, worked in a furniture factory for a long time. Finally, when I was 23 and I was just miserable and realized it had been 5 years since I had left high school, which 5 years is nothing, but your first 5 years of official adulthood that's everything there is at the time. And I'd done nothing, all the stuff that I said I was going to do, and I was just miserable, and I was working in this factory that I hated, and it wasn't even that bad of a job. It was just, doing not at all what I wanted to do or intended to do. And so finally, I had a friend moving to Boston, and finally I just tagged along with him and just did what I had to do to scramble enough money together and make it work. So I get to Boston. I'm almost 24 when I start stand-up comedy, and fortunately, other than pretty severe stage fright in the first few months, which is very normal, I just had a really natural. I've always kind of thought in peculiar ways, and so I wrote good absurd jokes. I had a good delivery. I used to just watch endless amounts of stand-up from the time I was about 10 years old till the time I was about 30. I used to watch stand-up basically every day. I mean, hours and hours and hours of stand-up every week. And I was a real student of the craft. And so it didn't take me long to start moving up the ranks. And then in record speed, I kind of, these things happen more these days with people getting discovered on YouTube and stuff. And then you can just kind of pop out of nowhere. But at that time, there wasn't, you started open mics, you moved up the ranks, you would eventually hopefully get discovered for a small comedy festival and do well there, or win this or that thing, and get to go into a bigger comedy festival, and then a bigger comedy festival, and then maybe an agent or manager sees you and you catch a break that way. And I actually progressed pretty quickly, and that stage of things, that's just kind of how the business worked at the time, and was really one of the last people to catch kind of a big break in that kind of old model of how comedy works. And this is, I didn't have a social media account at the time. I remember just hating the idea of social media, and turns out I was right. So many arguments with my representation that forced me to get on social media, but I wouldn't do anything else. I had no interest in a TV show or anything else. I just wanted to do stand up, and it was this pure art form that I loved so much. And then I started traveling internationally, and once I started traveling internationally, people internationally had themed shows, doing these. You may have seen Nanette on Netflix, which is a kind of a one-woman show, and quite a bit different than traditional American stand-up. But a lot of people internationally do these festivals where you do a one-man show, a one-person show. You dive into a theme and construct this whole thing, and that was a model of getting discovered internationally at the time. And I wanted to work more internationally, and here I was working within this model of getting on late night television and doing short absurdist jokes or whatever. And I was like, I just want to travel internationally more. Okay, what do I do? Write a one-man show or something? What would it be about? And I remember early on I had this, I just realized I had a lot of time travel jokes in my act. I just always found time travel amusing. And I'd read some physics books and stuff from time to time. And it was never a big reader, but when I did read, it was always science books, or even just things like Popular Science magazine, which suited my attention span quite well, where it's just like a few paragraphs of a fact or an article that takes up a couple pages, maybe. And I started gravitating more and more to that sort of stuff. And then like getting into more advanced reading, like Scientific American or something like that. Right. So I'm reading a lot of these things just naturally as a hobby. It's strange looking back because it never even occurred to me to put that into my act or to have that stuff as inspiration for comedy. It just didn't even occur to me. And it was just a hobby. It was just something that I was naturally drawn toward and I found interesting. I will say I did like the idea, once I had a stage, I did like the idea of shitting on religion. I had a lot of Jesus jokes and stuff like that. And I liked pushing buttons too. And so then I was on the road and I'm going through like the South and Central Time Zone and stuff like that. And oh man, I would love to, tell some Jesus jokes there or whatever and just push people's buttons. I loved doing that. And I had kind of a hybrid upbringing. I started in Boston. And so my home club was this like indie club in Harvard Square, but I also did a lot of these Elks Lodges and stuff like that. So I had a lot of experience early on performing for both like very conservative and very liberal audiences and everything in between. But I wasn't unfamiliar with any extreme. And I actually liked being on the road. I liked the idea of changing people's minds more because it seemed hard. And as I got older, I started to think, well, people just need to be pointed out. Need it pointed out why they're wrong. That's what people need. And so I'm still finding myself, because it's one thing to get on late night doing some weird absurdist things. It's another to now be touring around and doing 45-minute to hour-long performances each night. And so I'm interested in this international thing. And I'm like, what would my theme be? Had all these time travel jokes. I was like, maybe I'll write a show about time travel. And I started looking into time travel a bunch. And I was like, no, I'm going to make a show about physics. And I tried doing that. And this is early on. And with any new thing, it takes a long time and there's growing pains and it takes a while to learn. And that never went anywhere. And then I kind of had a few things happen. I kind of got what my main goal was. I got this Comedy Central Presents that was just a half-hour special. I shouldn't say that just a half-hour special. It was a big deal at the time that most comics, would kill for. But it was a goal of mine that I reached. It was a dream. And I reached it long before I kind of considered it possible. And it was kind of like, well, okay, the next step is an hour special. And then that would have to be a more cohesive thing, because just short, absurd jokes work well in small increments and having commercial breaks and that sort of thing. But having, I found out from being on the road that you want a more cohesive show, and you just kind of want to mix it up a little bit more when you're doing a longer show. All these things had me thinking. And I also just wasn't having my dreams come true wasn't as fulfilling as I thought they would be. And so I also was drinking quite heavily at the time, making some mistakes, making a lot of mistakes, broke because I was just bad with money, still am. And I was just kind of getting really frustrated, I guess, a lot with myself, but just what is the point in anything? That's been a theme of my life. What is the point in being here and living in this existence? And okay, you chase your dream. Once you have your dream, then that's what life is worth living for. And then when I did, I just didn't find that to be the case. And I screwed up with the relationship. I was in a new relationship, and I was kind of trying to understand why I had just messed things up so bad. And this new relationship that I was in was both exciting, but kind of a bad idea at the same time. And it was, I'm not a big weed guy, but at the time I was just in a little bit of a phase of smoking a fair amount of weed and once in a while eating mushrooms and stuff and watching a lot of Animal Planet. And I started watching a lot of David Attenborough documentaries and things, and just starting to make connections of oh, wow, that courtship behavior looks a lot like awkward situations I've been through and stuff like that. So I thought maybe this would be, at the time there was a lot of pressure on me to come up with a TV show idea or something like that, thing that I wasn't interested in at all. But when you're an agent or manager, you don't want to book a client that's just going to be going around, getting it. You're not going to do well getting 10% off of, headlining at the Looney Bin in Tulsa. And it's a lot of work booking a road comic too. And so there was just lots of pressure to try to get me to come up with something I was more interested in. And I just thought, this animal behavior stuff, there's something here where maybe there's a science of sex show or something like that you could do, where you can use animal behavior to get away with saying more inappropriate things and whatnot. And so I started digging into that, and I started digging into the science of sex. And I just really, as someone who had believed in evolution for a long time and read about evolution, there was just something about getting into evolutionary biology and seeing it in terms of relationships, in terms of mating behavior, in terms of what we're attracted to, that just started changing the way that it just started shifting the way that I saw the world. Not only that, but it also, as I started expanding that outside of mating behavior, which happened really quickly, because I was like, oh wait, this is way beyond some, some hook to get a television show. This is incredibly important stuff. How is this not taught in school? This is so important for people to know. And I just started kind of obsessing, and then I started, understanding where a lot of our belief systems evolved from, and some of the utility in our belief systems, even if the beliefs themselves are incorrect, some of the kind of social bonding and that sort of thing, and internal drives that those beliefs can help promote, do have a lot of utility, and it helped me kind of become less of an angry atheist and more just interested in, okay, so when someone's like believes in Bigfoot or whatever, like, what a stupid thing to think, right? But just saying, oh, well, that person's stupid, that's not a satisfying enough answer, because plenty of intelligent people, believe in Bigfoot, and plenty of dumb people don't believe in Bigfoot. And so why is it that people would believe something that is so clearly untrue? And what things do I believe are untrue that I'm convinced and very sure of, despite them being like maybe as incorrect as believing in Bigfoot? That's kind of the thing that I was obsessing about at this stage. And in the meantime, I had started reaching out to some scientists. I'd see someone give a lecture or something like that I thought was especially interesting or charismatic or whatever. And I just started emailing people and being like, hey, I would like to do something that combines science and comedy. Are you ever in LA? Or I don't know what this is, but there's something here, and I want to put together a show that combines science and comedy. That's all I know. I don't know how I'm going to do it. And I found out in a hurry that, man, a lot of scientists were just so helpful and enthusiastic, even though, man, I look back at some of those early conversations and I just did not know very much at all. I mean, I still don't, but now I can. I mean, I can go to say a dinner with a bunch of scientists, and as long as they're not going down a rabbit hole of like really, really, really specific jargony thing, and it's a little more of a kind of philosophical conversation about some of the basics of, say, cognitive biases or something, I can hold my own all right in a conversation. But man, and I still have a long ways to go. But at the time, I was just pure enthusiasm alone, and I didn't really know what to do with this. There was a stage when I just quit doing regular stand-up, and I just started riffing with ideas, and sometimes it would go really well, and then sometimes it would bomb horribly. So I really started jeopardizing my touring career at the same time that I was having like these relationship issues and sort of starting to have some like mental breakdowns and stuff as well with figuring out what I wanted to do with my career. And over time, the pieces started coming together. I made a special called Mating Season that's on Netflix, and it's got some okay stuff in it and everything, but it's just not at the level that I'm at now, and it was kind of meant to be. I learned from that it was overly accessible. I tried to really reach across, and now when I'm touring in the South and the Central Time Zone, I'm in these Elks Lodges and conservative places. I wonder if I can talk about evolution in just an interest rather than attacking people's beliefs for being dumb. What if instead I just presented fun information about, say, animal behavior or mating lives or whatever, and introduced some basic concepts about evolution that way? That would get people thinking. That's what I was excited about at the time. I was like, oh, maybe there's a way to get people more interested in science. That way, it's not that people are dumb, it's that they haven't had access to these ideas. No one's ever been exposed to these ideas. If they were exposed to these ideas, my goodness, clearly they would see things as clearly as I do, and the world would change for the better, and we'd no longer be as dependent on superstition and that sort of thing, right? So that was my next failed idea. But along that path, that's when I started this. It was around that time that I started this podcast. Again, didn't know what I was doing at the time. Just knew that I was so fascinated in science generally, had so many questions, and had started making some friends in academia and people that could help me find other scientists when I was in other areas. And so I, 7 years ago or so, I released the first one of these podcasts. And in the beginning, I was exceptionally intimidated. I still am pretty often, because I'm talking with someone that knows so much about the subject that they're talking about. They're probably smarter than me generally as well. The amount to be under the amount of stuff that I need to learn to them, like really, if this was a full-time job, the number of hours to like truly prep for one of these, if I had the bandwidth to do it, would be insane. I'd be wanting to take a class on a given subject every week or two, just to keep up with interviews. I do quite a bit of that stuff, but not nearly as frequent as I'd like. One, I just fall out of it sometimes, and two, I just have so many other things going on. And this podcast was never meant to. At the time that I started this podcast, podcasting was so new, and it was always just about growing an audience. It wasn't, at the time, I never even thought, I wonder if I could do that for a living, or I wonder if you could make a bunch of money with a podcast. I mean, I knew some people that had or were starting to, but it just it seemed to me that this was a way that I could get an education and just generate a bunch of other ideas and think of better ideas. I was basically using this podcast to help put together other shows and to use it as like a pitch of a show. So I started reaching out to, anytime I was on tour, I'd reach out to, I would find a university. I'd look through various departments, see what was kind of how this podcast works, and how I get into a bunch of disciplines is I kind of start with what my wheelhouse is. And then I try to find someone that's kind of close to that wheelhouse, but outside of it. So I'm always continuing to learn something that's pretty new, but it's not so far away from something that I know that I don't know what questions to ask, or I don't know what the hell the academic's talking about, or whatever else. And that's not always the case, but that's kind of when I'm searching for somebody, that's often what I'm looking for. And so it went from kind of evolutionary biology stuff and evolutionary psychology stuff to just general psychology, learning about sociology more, learning about things like behavioral economics and say mating behavior were things that grabbed me as, oh, this is something that you can. I've always been very aware that your average person just is not going to give a shit about science, just ever. And I mean, there has been times when I'm like, maybe I'll present it in a way that it will get people really engaged. But the average person, I mean, boy, it's, I talk with people all the time, and it's so rare to even hear. And there's plenty of like popular science podcasts out there, but it's rare to hear in real life anyone saying anything scientific-ish sounding ever. I mean, most people are, stretched pretty thin with working their 9-to-5 job and being an expert in that thing that they do, and getting better at trying to get a promotion while also taking care of their kids and family, and get done with the end of the day and just want entertainment and something fun to watch on TV or whatever. And that's kind of just natural and easy. And there usually has to be just a genuine curiosity that gets people interested in real science. If you go into a bookstore, the science section is so small. There's the wellness section that will have the word science slapped all over covers of diet fads and various like life coaching things, and even you'll see more of that in the enormous like spiritual section as well, where they'll try to like even science shows that it's funny that that people are like, oh, science doesn't know everything, and then they also go, oh, see science validates my point of view of this and that. Scientifically, quantum physics, according to that, we're all magic. And like, well, I don't know. Have you like read quantum physics, or did you read a spiritual book with the word quantum physics in it? And the point is most people just simply don't gravitate to the natural sciences. And you can look at any bookstore and just compare the size of the sections if you think I'm incorrect about that. But I'm getting off course. But so I started with things like evolutionary psychology and biology, and early on, you just start noticing gaps in things, or you start noticing, people will have conflicting ideas within the scientific community, and you wonder, oh, who's closer there, and maybe I'd need to learn more about neuroscience, or that. Oh, that's what I was going to say when I mentioned behavioral economics. I was always trying to find topics that people could relate to the most. So most people think about science, they think about it as like, chemistry, or making a volcano in 4th grade. And that's what science is, or dissecting something. That's what science is to a lot of people. And it's kind of like dry, boring, or gross, or useless, and who would need that? And so I tend to focus, this isn't always the case, but I tend to focus on things that kind of more directly impact our lives. I think all of the various disciplines of science impact our lives and can better our lives and are incredibly important. But we only have so much time, and it's intuitive to care about the things that affect us the most. So things like mating, things like how do you get more money? Why do we spend in peculiar ways? And like I have mismanaged finances so many times. Why does that happen? And so I just kind of kept on branching out into more and more fields, all while taking, online courses to get kind of 101 amount of knowledge for as many different fields as I can. That's basically how I try to prepare for this show. I reach out, at least when I was touring, I'd randomly find universities, and that was an important thing early on as well. So I thought, well, there's this idea about science too, that it's pretentious, or these ivory towers or whatever, and or like people get their ideas about what's scientists are up to from television. It's like these exciting stories of mad scientists plotting against us and stuff that, then turns into these kind of insane conspiracy theories, and stuff that are incredibly prolific, these days, and, incredibly popular, and just lies and gossip are clickbaity. When I was touring, when I was finding just random academics, I was going to, check out their labs, check out their offices, often invited into their homes or wherever. I always just wherever it was most convenient for my guests to want to record, I'd bring my mobile equipment to them and record that way. And I didn't go into this knowing what I was going to learn from that, but right away I just kind of learned that, oh yeah, these are like normal people with jobs that just have kind of a natural aptitude for thinking in this way, for critical thinking and questioning things and going through these kind of rigorous thought processes of hearing people say I don't know more often than the general public ever does, and hearing people think through kind of the many different confounds, the complexities, the different ways of looking at a problem, and also just seeing that this idea of these elitists, or it's like, well, unless I'm in a Truman Show where with no notice whatsoever, some academic constructs this facade of a super mediocre office, or like average at best home, and like very sensible car. Just seeing that over and over and over again. Like, well, where are these elitists that I've heard so much about, that people that didn't go to college seem very obsessed with? And I just thought, no one knows about these people. As social media was growing, I was like, oh, these people a lot of them didn't even have a Twitter account. They have no social following. They have no way of getting out incredible information that could change the way that we live our lives, help us understand ourselves better. Even things like, potentially treating the blindness or something like that, right? And so early on, my idea was like, oh, this is what I like to do, is just show how these are normal people with kind of interesting but normal jobs. And so I was kind of like, well, maybe I would present a show idea that's like the Mike Rowe of academia in a way, instead of showing these dirty jobs, these blue collar jobs that help you appreciate what it's like to clean sewers or whatever. Go in and help people appreciate what scientists do and how they discover the things that they do. People that don't have much of a voice, people that have been more than open and enthusiastic and generally happy to help and do whatever interviews or anything else. And I just absolutely fell in love with the scientific community. I love the way that they think. I love how they're far more patient with people than I am. That's for sure. I think when you're a professor and you need to every day get up in front of a bunch of disinterested, hungover freshmen that ask just the dumbest questions imaginable, and you kind of need to train yourself to approach that with curiosity and everything else. It's a different skill than I have as a stand-up comedian, where I just get to jump up on my soapbox and tell people what's what. And so just the amount of patience and understanding and empathy and consideration that I've seen demonstrated over and over and over again by just every scientist in every field that I've met. Not that there's not, certainly exceptions to that and everything, but just so generous with their time and so thoughtful. And I've gotten to learn so much doing this show that it's just been, absolutely incredible. And so because of that, I was just always kind of getting a free education, and I was touring, and I never really, if this podcast would have became like, oh my gosh, this Here We Are podcast just changed my whole life and became the most popular thing in the world, like, great, that would have been wonderful. But I just never, I never thought of this as other than like a credit to put in advertising for live shows or people are like, oh, this comedian interviews a scientist. That's interesting. And people come into shows, or when pitching a potential TV show or something, being like, oh, I've interviewed 400 scientists, things like that. That's where I thought there would be an advantage to doing this show from any kind of a financial or business standpoint. I didn't really, and also growing the kind of audience that I like, because I find that the audience that's into this show is just fantastic. They're intelligent, kind, thoughtful, curious people. And I'm not saying that to pander. I'm saying that because I do lots of different shows, and I've done lots of different things over the years, and I've pandered to obnoxious drunk crowds. I've done all the button pushing and dick jokes, and I've been everywhere, and I've always been a big drinker. And so I've hung out with just every kind of crowd and had drinks with just every kind of person. And when I meet listeners of this show, they're just the people that I wish my audiences were 100% filled with. Because even when I started doing more science themed shows, like a show called Stand Up Science, and I still have to advertise to a lot of, I use themes to get strangers to advertise to come who don't necessarily know who I am, or, aren't on my mailing list, or I'm not big on their radar, even if maybe they heard me on a podcast or something in the past. But I just had in doing that, I realized that the people that are interested in science, sometimes they just like the word science. It's kind of like I used to be like, well, evolution, everyone knows that, without actually understanding and being curious enough about how it worked. Just more like, my side's right, evolution's right, haha, I won, don't need to think about it any more than that. And it's a thing, you slap the word science on and like, ooh, that's a smart thing or whatever. And so there will be some audience that just comes, they just like that the word science is on a poster. And another thing that comes along with that is they're like, can I bring my kid? And like, no, please don't. Like, I'm an adult. I like talking about adult things. I like not just talking about, say, sex or something like that might be inappropriate or awkward if you bring your kid, but not just like dirty things, but just talking about dark subjects. I love talking about suicidal thoughts and depression and just mortality and just the many adult stressors and the grind and the futility of so many things are some of my favorite things to talk about. And I think cynicism, although in a personal life can be somewhat delusional and destructive, I think when it comes to comedy, I think it's a really fun tool when used appropriately and not overdone. And so, people that actually listen to the show that stumbled upon me for whatever reason just tend to get things in the way that I get them from just tend to be really naturally curious people that are also self-educated. Because it's a lot of times, I have scientists that listen to this show, but it's a lot of times, factory workers or people that drive truck or whatever and are just naturally inquisitive, intelligent people that just didn't go the traditional college route or didn't fit into the, hated school like I did, but are smart people that like learning things just kind of on their own terms. And I have been able to find a little bit of a audience there with this show. So there's been benefits to it, but the main thing was it's just been this incredible free education that I've got to have, and anyone that comes along is, I'm sure in some ways getting more of an education out of this than I am, because although I do learn quite a bit in preparing for the interview, I don't even know what the hell that I said after half the interviews are over. I don't even know what they said. It's just kind of my adrenaline's going a little. I'm focused on a lot of things that aren't just learning. Like when I'm taking a class, I'm not on the show. I'm reading a book or taking a class or something, and I'm truly like, how do I get this content into my brain? That's a very different thing than, all right, how do I sound interesting? How do I ask interesting questions? How do I make my guests sound interesting? How do I set them up to succeed and that sort of thing? But it's just been such a great education that I've gotten out of this. And then COVID happened, and then my touring went away, and all of a sudden I was like, well, is there a way to make a living off of this show? And I just don't. So there's a lot of things of like figuring out algorithms and stuff like that. And there's certainly science podcasts that people are able to make a living off of. Not many of them, but I don't know if there's like diminishing returns and how to look up the algorithm, figure out algorithms. I added video to this and that hasn't taken off at all. We have a decent listenership, but the video that I've added hasn't it's new, but it hasn't taken off on YouTube. And now it's, nearly 2 years in. Same with social media. It's not like any of the stuff that I've made for social media has blown up. Again, I haven't been super active and trying too hard to do that as much as I should, just because I kind of hate that stuff. But I find so much value in all of the other aspects of what I do. So I don't know what the future of this show is, because sometimes I think, well, when I started the show, I was so insecure and I was so nervous, and I just didn't know enough to be doing this show. I just kind of threw myself into it and bit the bullet and got out of my comfort zone. And I've learned quite a bit since then. And although I'm still learning and getting better and having ups and downs, but quite a bit better as a host than I used to be, I sometimes think maybe I should just scrap this, start over, rebrand with something else, have like a different format or something like that. Or just, like there's this podcast ologies, like that's a name. That's a good name. Most of the names of the top podcasts, like Star Talk or something like that, they all have a title that implies like exactly what it is. And Here We Are was just something that was kind of personally meaningful to me, which is I just kind of get overwhelmed by learning about all of these things and all of our past histories and the many biological and social influences that built who we are and why we behave, and figuring out what to do with that and how to make sense of this existence is just so overwhelming. And sometimes and only gets more overwhelming the more that I learn and the more that I realize how much there is to learn. And at any given moment, I kind of just have to throw out my shoulders and go, well, here we are. And that's something that I said to myself quite a bit before starting this show, and that was the inspiration for the title. And so here we are starting the 8th season, and I'm going to keep doing this, and I'm hoping other things that I do will grow my audience, which will then trickle in over here, which I think this show you just have to be in the right mood for at the right time. And depending on, I think that there's a lot of just kind of fun, turn your brain off comedy podcasts that are really entertaining and well suited for when you're doing data entry or something and need to pay a decent amount of attention to what you're doing, but can kind of check in and out. And this podcast, and Mind Under Matter, is a little bit more like that. It was part of the intent with Mind Under Matter, is it's just much more accessible. There's more laughs along the way. I don't know how I could create a show that you could learn more from than Here We Are, but it requires attention, and people have to be in the right headspace and everything else. I have listeners that listen to this while they're cleaning or taking a bath or whatever, driving to work, and can devote just a bit more attention to it. And so I'm still sorting out what I want to do with this show, but I just one thing's for sure, after 7 years of doing this, my love and interest in science and of meeting all of these people that work with it and think scientifically, that's the big thing that I think will come across with this, if you listen to this show enough and hear so many people from so many different disciplines, is that what you'll notice is that there's a science isn't always just about learning, doing math, or learning about chemistry or certain molecules or this or that. But there's just a way of thinking scientifically, of making, falsifiable predictions, of thinking about, well, how would you test that thing? How would you find out the answer to that? What possible other explanations are there for what we're seeing? Simple things like correlation versus causation type stuff. These two things look to go together. Did one of them cause the other one, or not? Just things like that have been ingrained in so many of the people that I talk to, that I think rub off on you when you listen to enough scientists talk. It's just a style of thinking critically that anyone would benefit from in any part of their life, in any job that they have, and will, I do think, create a, there's sometimes you learn a bunch of new things, and for me, it'll make me feel like hopeless, or, what's even the point of anything? This is, I'll learn something some dark truths of the universe or whatever. But I do think that learning more and learning to think better, which is something that is, always a work in progress. I think that it creates a lot of opportunities for things like, innovating and creating lifestyle change and that sort of thing. So I've greatly benefited from doing this podcast, and it's been a lot of work, and it's sometimes frustrating. And of course, I wish it was. I wish everyone in the world was so interested in this stuff that this podcast was like totally unnecessary, because there was already a zillion other podcasts talking about this, and it's all over TV. And instead of the Animal Planet and History Channel going into like finding Bigfoot and ancient alien stuff, because that's juicy and exciting and clickbaity. I wish the clickbait was going the other way. I wish instead of the Science Channel and Animal Planet and everything else having to dumb itself down for ratings, there was cultural pressure to raise the bar. And I don't think that's out of the scope of possibilities. I just think it's more kind of, it's a smaller audience, not because people don't have the capacity, just that, we all like to, at the end of the day, most of these intelligent people I talk to that have incredibly mentally demanding jobs indulge in the same dumb shit that the rest, love catching some sports ball, or, going to the bar and having some drinks with friends, and, that sort of thing. And so it's just, it's harder. Raising the bar is more challenging. It requires a greater attention span. It requires a greater level of interest and curiosity. And but whatever small group of people are into that and supporting it, I would love to see that grow by just not just for my own benefit, but just I would like to see more interest in things like, David Attenborough documentaries and stuff that are do well and are popular. But I think everyone, even though they aren't perfect in any, just everyone should sit through a season of Planet Earth or something like that, and truly appreciate this existence that we are actually in, and just how fascinating actual reality is, and that we actually get to experience all of this. You're never going to get to meet Bigfoot. And if finding Bigfoot is what gets you out of bed in the morning, hey, more power to you. But it's a shame that people don't care about actual primates that can be studied, that we can learn about ourselves from, that are potentially going extinct, and we need to be more aware of some of our impact and endless things like that. So that's why I like to say that those of you that listen to the all the way to the end of this podcast, you're my favorites. But it's truly, people that listen to this show. Obviously I'm biased, but people that are just into that sort of, into learning more about reality, which is endless and endlessly fascinating. There's going to be bits and pieces that are boring, and are going to be harder to get through, but it's so worth it. And it increases our appreciation for life. It increases our ability to navigate reality better, in my opinion. And so here we are in the 8th season of the show. Thank you so much for listening.